The structure of the Roman legion by the time of the crisis of the 3rd century was in need of change, to be updated from an offensive format into a defensive format. The issue was that Rome had too many wide borders. This they could manage, but due to a series of diseases, civil wars, and countless other issues, the manpower had been seriously drained. Rome split their forces into 2 armies. One, the Limitanei, who were recruited from the front lines and defended the front lines. These troops were low in rank, yet much stronger and better equipped than they appear in-game, according to new discoveries. Their goal was to defend the front, the forts and the cities, and very rarely would they leave their station. This is portrayed in-game by giving them low morale and attack, yet high defensive stats, forcing the player to use them either to slow down an army to allow the other units to swoop in and do the heavy fighting, or on the plaza. The second force was the comitatenses. These were garrisoned further behind the lines, and would only act when the enemy slipped past the defences and entered into deeper Roman territory. Often these troops would move from their garrison to counter the enemy. In-game, these units are better at attack, to reflect this. In addition to all of this, serious design changes were made, arguably due to the lacking of manpower. Changes such as better armour and equipment, which will be discussed later, and a strategy of avoiding battles until they had a clear advantage, unlike before where Rome would try and battle as soon as they could. The comitatenses are the group we will be focusing on in this video, as those were the most similar across the empire. Firstly, these comitatenses would make up the main backbone of the army, like we see in post-Marian days with the legionary cohorts, and like before, the first cohort of comitatenses was larger and higher ranked. One unit of these should also be present. They will be stationed in one line, with a reserve line behind them, just in case the enemy happened to break through. That reserve line would often consist of some cavalry also. Speaking of cavalry, if you were to go for a historical roster, you should place 2 units of horsemen on either end, and the Scholae Palantina closest to the comitatenses, and the lighter cav, the Foederati horsemen, on the outer side. The Foederati were soldiers from foreign cultures who had to fight for Rome as part of a deal or a treaty. So often these people would be barbarians, as we see them to appear in-game. From my sources, it seems the infantry Foederati would often hold the flanks. Now we get to the front line. By this point, ballistas had become much more common, and each squad of comitatenses would have 1 siege equipment to themselves. So either 2 squads of catapults or 2 squads of ballistas at the front, stretched out, would work well enough. In front of those would be archers and slingers, who will pelt the enemy and pull back to the rear once their opponents got too close. In-game, the player only has archers to represent this. It would also be common for the Roman army at this point to have a squad of missile cavalry at the front to fulfill a similar purpose. This would be shown in-game by a unit of Equite Sagittarii. Bucellarii appear in-game as crossbowmen. Historically, they were units that were highly paid and often had a specific skill on the battlefield. They were not a standard part of the Roman army, but rather more like mercenaries, however only loyal to Rome. They were very frequently used during the civil wars. In-game, I would say about 1 of these squads in your roster would be accurate. Similarly, you could argue that 1 unit of privateries would fit in your squad as well. I messed up that pronunciation, didn't I? Yeah, probably messed up all the pronunciations. Historically, it is debated what their purpose was. However, most lean towards them being scouts, which does kind of fit their appearance in-game. On top of all of that, the Roman army would build ditches, small walls, trenches, whatever they could to improve their defensive position. The comitatenses were also armed with plumetari, darts, that could travel much further than their old pila. In addition to that, they would carry 6 of them, rather than 2 before. That there is for the Western Roman Empire. The eastern side had a very similar layout, however they also had cataphracts on their side, which were also not unheard of to the west, but were more frequent in the east. There is a general pattern with all of these changes. The better equipment, the more javelins, the longer range, the siege equipment. It's all about minimising losses rather than maximising gains, which was the case before. You can truly see the draining of manpower, as each Roman soldier's life seems to be much more valued than before. But you can also see, arguably, barbarianisation with some of their ambush strategies and recruitment patterns. This has been argued to be a result of more barbarians joining the army through fortification. However, more sources of mine say that it was because they needed to do this, simply due to the lack of manpower. The days of fancy columns and legions were far over. I favour this latter argument. And that is one issue. The amount of sources about this time period and the fighting style is limited, and historians don't have one set answer. One half of my sources argued one side of the argument, the other half of my sources argued the other side of the argument. The only thing they actually agreed on was the lack of information from this period. But anyway, this is the closest I could get. The truth is, nobody knows for certain. I used as many sources as I possibly could, linked down below in the description, as well as some of my own logic, due to the lack of information. I hope you enjoyed. Do you want to see more episodes like this, maybe covering other, less well-known factions, or different Talk to War games entirely? Let me know with a like, a share, and by subscribing, and all of that. Check out my other historical videos also. I have been MELKOR. I do hope you have enjoyed. I do hope you've learnt something, and I hope to see you tomorrow with the next one. For now, goodbye.